started my career as a qualitative researcher many years ago. And one of my earliest assignments was going off into the interiors of Uttar Pradesh to get insights that would make, villagers actually use soap. In those days, villagers did not use soap. Everybody did not use soap. We defined our target audience as users and non-users. We looked at, the north zone, and we looked at the south zone in the country. Within each zone, we selected villages with a population of less than about, say, 5,000 people. Within the village, we covered caste groups to avoid bias. We met with, Anganwadi workers and teachers, and we recruited them as influencers. When we were on the field, we did a few interviews, we did a few focus groups. We looked around the village for about, 20 minutes and decided we had enough insights to bring back. We got back to the office, we did content analysis, and then all this qualitative stuff that we picked up, we fed into quantitative systems and large systems to actually measure how large these opportunities or these insights were. Now, although our training was to look for inconsistencies, our innate desire actually to find patterns in the data made us ignore those inconsistencies. I now realize the whole process we had when we started off researching almost forced us to flow away from the person, from the human, from the person that we were actually researching. It was more about extrapolation, it was more, about linearity and measurement, and in those days, no marketing decisions were really taken without those kinds of data points. An insight, what was insight then in those days, was more like an interpretation, a reading of a given belief or a situation or a behavior. And the attempt was for researchers or for insights managers to actually attempt to explain the situation in a new or a different way that made much better meaning. But today, what I want to actually focus on is not 20 years ago. I want to talk about how the internet, how computing, how social media are reframing what we believe insights are and what insights can mean to people. I'll focus more on insight that helps us understand our customers and their preferences, on insights that help us market better and solve problems. I mean, we can talk about reputational insights, we can talk about all sorts of insights, but the focus of my talk is really on marketing and coming up with better solutions. And towards the end, I'll pose some questions and challenges for the future. I'd like to start with a few of my observations. One is that data is everywhere. Greg Ketchum from Ogilvy Creative, who's created the IBM Smarter Planet Anthem campaign, says, one of the pillars of building a smart planet is the ability to harness that data, because in the data are answers to the world's biggest problems. When you see the data, you understand it, and then it starts working for you, and you start working the system better. So the traditional business of data collection is the starting point for insights, and that's how we used to do it, is changing. Data is being collected today for us. We don't have to go out there as researchers actively collecting data. And all of us as researchers, as marketers, we salivate over so much data that is available to us. But what do we do with that? It's also very cheap, this data. It's not expensive. And everybody has access to it. I mean, look at the census data, for example. It's an awesome piece of sort of government that the government has put together. And in many ways, it's directly competing with research agencies. But also, governments can now link that data to every individual, and not just a demographic or a psychographic segment that you create. And so can companies like Google and Facebook, or telcos or app providers, etc. So insight has such a big playground to play in today. And this data is not static. It has a lot of flow. My second observation is that increasingly people live in a network world where they communicate with other people through social media. We all do that. We're tweeting away right from here. Now, contextualizing our lives happens not only by geography or ethnicity or linguistically, as we, in the old days of research actually looked at it, but also through culture that is embedded in our social networks. So where does our information seeking take place? What are our reference points? Where does meaning occur? Earlier, it was all linear, and it took place when people got together, physically. That evolved to, okay, what's the information I can get broadcasted to me from TV or on the radio? The lucky ones then started searching for things on, on the PC and, started using Google. And now I'm on my mobile, I can tweet a picture, somebody gives me feedback on it instantaneously. And the whole network of feedback and how we're informed is changing. So these networks actually bring meaning into our lives. They also fill the time in between, and that can be really, really useful time to gain insight and to understand what insight is and to bring forth new ideas. Insight is embedded in people and cultures, and often we forget that. We just look at data as data points. The third observation I've had is that is around negotiation and purchase. We've never been afraid to wheel and deal as a culture, and we're constantly asking, is this the best price you can give me? Today, however, we can check all this. We have all of it at our fingertips in the mobile. We've heard the whole morning has been about, you know, how powerful the mobile can become as a tool. We make our mobiles and our phones earn their keep. We look for coupons and offers online. But when we go to buy a microwave or a TV at Vijay Sales, we'll negotiate in a whole different way physically. Those things are not lost. And yet when you actually look at, you know, the industry that is mining these insights and looking at purchase behavior, they're not integrating the online behaviors, purchase behaviors with the offline. They're really talking about offline purchase panels that are still driving a lot of promotional activities and marketing activities. So we will miss insight if we're careful. I mean, one of the examples today in the US is that, you know, I just read that Best Buy is in trouble. It is a tech store, and everything in it is disappearing actually into the mobile now. Even food, the way people are buying food is changing. The fourth thing is the area of media consumption. Now, when we talk about media audience measurements and gaining insights as an industry, we look at, you know, RAM for radio, TAM for television, WAM for web, IRS for print, etc. But where's the convergence in all this? Where are we looking at a human being as a person all in one, and these are the various media options that he's actually or she's actually, you know, got at this. Where are we factoring things like Mobisodes, Flipboard, YouTube, just to name a few? You know, I'm questioning how long will these standalone systems and audience measurement systems, which are meant to provide insights, last? Yeah, this sometimes is the new API. I just threw it in for a joke. It's something we've seen. The patient is now becoming the doctor. So for insight to be relevant, it must belong somewhere. You know, earlier we had very, again, clear demarcations and definitions of who are we targeting, who's our target audience, our TG, our TA, who's an expert, who's an influencer, how to contextualize them. And today it's all blurring, and there are new power equations that are being forged. So who do you interview? If you're a prescription drug company, who are you going to interview? The doctor? That's what we did in 20 years ago. But no, what about the people that are actually researching things on their own and increasingly becoming doctors themselves or self-medicators? This is interesting. This observation is really not about the pictures on the chart, but it's just a demo of how communities at your fingertips work. Osama bin Laden died, and Keith Urban, who worked with one of the US government offices, tweeted that. And these are some amazing network visualizations by Social Flow to showcase their analysis of the effects of timing and topicality. In this study, they looked at 14.8 million tweets and bit.ly links. And they wanted to understand how one tweet can become such a big source of insight. Now, of course, that was sensational news, and it has its place. When we think of brands, when we think of the corporate world, it is different. But the key is listening. Are you listening to your networks? And learning to listen is quite a skill today. So what I'd say is listen with your senses all tuned in. And for that, you need to be part of the community. As a product or a brand manager, how wonderful it would be to get even 250 people to play with as your innovation panel, who are constantly engaging with you. You get answers so much quicker. It's live, it's happening in real time. And building this ongoing relationship with the community often allows insights to bubble up as organically as possible, which is very different from the old model of you have a question, you go seeking an insight and an understanding of that question. And my final observation is that we're now moving to many-to-one approaches. You know, there was a time we broadcasted. So there was the one-to-many kind of approach where advertisers, marketers spoke to massive audiences. Then there was all this romance about social networking sites and many-to-many, and everyone's talking to everybody. And there was a lot of chaos there. Now, it's increasingly with the mobile, increasingly with smartphones, you can track every single person, serve and target them on an almost individual basis. Everybody is after you as a customer or a consumer. Data is being collected on you every second. And often, this is invisible. It's not visible data. So when you can target every single person in the population, insight takes on new forms and can come from any one person in that population. And you also get a virtual blueprint of their lives. So you get the whole entire context of how and where that insight resides. There are dangers of privacy and coercion, censorship, ethics, but this is happening. So just stretching our thinking from the now into the future, is this a new space that is being created for insights, which is different from what traditional market research agencies did? The reality still is that users can't, for the most part, imagine the future. And it will never turn out exactly as predicted. But as researchers and data gatherers, we have to help our clients ask better questions and do it faster. We have to keep them curious. We have to spur their desire to fish around, not just go in our narrow focus and address a certain problem. Now, how does this impact business? And how does this impact me in my business? And what are the things that we're doing differently? I always thought that as a qualitative researcher, insights was my area. I was the custodian of insights. We'd locate insight, we'd hand it over to the marketing team or the advertising team, and then they would go and innovate or activate upon it. We will continue to do that. But for us to succeed, we'll need to have many more skills. We'll need to be ethnographers, trend spotters, netnographers, blogographers, mobile app experts, data visualizers, designers, facilitators, co-creators, all of that. And while there is a strong case and need for analytics like Buzzmetrics and Radian 6, and real insight will stand up and be counted when we're able to put the human back into the data. How do we do this? This is one model. We don't just research our subjects like we did 20 years ago. We need to have conversations with them. We need to engage them, and we need to engage ourselves with our audiences in their time and spaces. So we're developing and using both synchronous and asynchronous online and offline tools to develop these learning spaces for our clients. An example is crowdsourcing insights and solutions from community. That is one way. And here we see the rise, and I see so many more ethnographer researchers on sites like Twitter, etc. So the researcher Twitter, the blogographers, the netnographers, they must engage with the social tools and must be present. Kickstarter is a nice example of crowdsourcing feedback and funding. It really does turn research on its head. For example, you come up with an idea, you put it on a site, and then see who will pay money to support it. If you reach your target, you get funded. Also, who is a researcher today is being redefined. And because of the way insights are being generated, we're all researchers today. You're a researcher and not just me. The tools are in our pockets. How are we using the tools in our pockets to actually gain insights into our problems and our solutions and our problems? So I'd urge you to begin thinking of your customer or target audience as your researcher rather than merely a subject or a customer or a consumer or a respondent. Reach them in different ways, reach them in different times in their spaces. Let them feel they're participating and contributing. The nuances are much finer now, and you can actually then begin to co-create solutions with them. This is one of the things that is being developed. This is something we're developing, but a lot of companies are developing small mobile apps that can be used and embedded with our customers. So if you're looking at a study over a period of time, like a year, and you're studying what is the future of mobile social computing, you get your people to actually have these tools with them, and then they will organically send things back to us. Another example is, using blogs. We did studies for Wikipedia on how to take it mobile, and we actually use blogs to actually increase flows of information between clients and between participants. I can take some of these conversations offline later. I'm just trying to run. So what is the future, just to sum up? Where once market research agencies and market researchers were where people went seeking insights, today I think market research is morphing, and is the traditional market research agency really the future at all. What is research is also morphing. You know, we're no more data collectors. We don't need to do that. That job is simply gone. The winners will be those who can access this data, which is bubbling up in different forms. It exists everywhere. Those who can make narratives out of it and analyze it and create compelling stories out of it. Those who can, you know, it's more like moving to grounded theory, which is where you actually look at things that are bubbling up from organically, rather than going with a set questionnaire or a set, you know, discussion guide. And tools and techniques will become critical. Integrated software, hardware solutions, multi-skilled researchers, as I talked about earlier. But before I end, just a couple of cautionary points and a couple of cautionary thoughts. There's this temptation to do it yourself research. And possibly Google, Facebook, and all other social media platforms will offer massive panels of users and, you know, a huge playground for insights. If you need a quick global survey of young smartphone users, women only, no problem. You can set it up in like literally 5 minutes and get answers in another 30. If you have some collage-based qual research done in 20 countries on a new tourist destination, no problem. It'll just take a day to actually start generating feedback on these kinds of things. But what is the quality and where is the insight in that? Oops. Yeah. The second thing, and this is my friend Gautam John from Twitter, alerted me to this yesterday, in fact, and he said that, you know, there's this TED talk, and this is Eli Pariser, who says, Facebook isn't the only place that is doing this invisible algorithmic filtering of the web. Even when you're logged out, Google uses 57 signals to personally tailor your query results. There is no standard Google anymore, and it's hard to see. It's invisible. The internet is showing us what it thinks we want to see, but not necessarily what we need to see. So what you see might be very different from what I see. And a lot is getting hidden by algorithms and by these massive sort of storehouses of data. So how accurate are these digital filters? They often claim to know you better than you do. And that is another area that I would worry about. And the last area I'd worry about is, of course, privacy in all this. I mean, it's not just about who's watching, but it'll eventually become about who owns you. You know, that is scary to me. And there's no denying that those in power are leveraging our tools to exert new forms of power over us. We do it all the time as researchers as well. And imagine what governments can do and, you know, big companies can do with massive data. And the same insight that brings you better products and services can also create bubbles and get you arrested. Awesome, possibly, you know, but very, very scary. We'll have to deal with some of these issues as well as an industry. So thank you.